Everyone in the courtroom grew hushed as they saw Gandil Diddy's for more than 15 years. The former chief of security pointed squarely at his former boss and uttered the words that would alter everything. "I saw him complete everything, and I can see that in a matter of seconds." Dylan's expression changed from one of confidence to fear. The prosecution team couldn't contain their smiles as they frantically started whispering to one another. This was when you're new to our channel, make sure to see the moment they've been waiting for. For more breaking news on high-profile cases like this one, like and subscribe. We'll give you the whole story. The headlines. No one anticipated that Diddy's most dependable guardian would turn into his. When John D. took the stand, the audience was tense due to the most damning allegation. Amount of this security caught the attention of a man who had once threatened anyone who approached his well-known employer too closely. Professional until he began disclosing information he had held for almost two. Even the judge paused as decades' worth of gasps reverberated around the courtroom. No warning, just Gene Deal calmly recounting the horrors he had to endure, observed while working for Diddy. And up until that point, Diddy had seemed at ease, frequently grinning and whispering to his lawyers throughout the trial, although something had changed, perhaps because the man who knew all of his secrets was willing to talk openly. Given that the person sitting opposite from him had been present in the room during his most intimate moments, perhaps it was the knowledge that the one individual he believed would never turn on him was about Diddy completed the task by acting as though he wasn't sitting there as no longer a celebrity. He was there as an employer who had given too many secrets to the wrong person, a man who abruptly became aware that the walls were closing in, and when Gene Deal started talking, due to Diddy's former bodyguard's revelations of secret parties, the courtroom was unprepared for what they would hear. Not only was the alleged criminal activity and systemic mistreatment shocking, but it was also a first-hand narrative from someone who had been compensated to permanently conceal these truths. It began as if it were just another day of low-volume chatter filled the room during the trial, while the reporters crouched in there as they waited for the next witness to be summoned. Lawyers murmured plans in designated rows, but when the next witness's name was announced, the room changed, and a pin could be heard. Some believed it was a PR gimmick, while others believed it was an error. But the way Gene Deal strode to the stand with a determined expression in his eyes and a purposeful gait declared this to be true. The judge arched an eyebrow, and Diddy, who had been leisurely reclined on his chair, appeared to have lightning struck him, causing his face and hands to lose their color, had been taking notes with assurance during the trial. Froze John D. sat down at the witness stand in the middle of his sentence without even looking at anyone. Take a look at Diddy, who was sitting up straight now, his eyes wide with what appeared like panic. "I'm here to be honest about what I saw when Gene Deal first started. Been keeping these secrets for too long." The court granted permission, and the trial changed course immediately, because there was no media narrative that included what John D. was about to say. Wasn't a social media leak. Rather, it was something that a select group of workers had meticulously protected, who had received a substantial payment to remain silent. Diddy's lawyer promptly objected, claiming that Gandil had signed several non-disclosure agreements, and the prosecutor questioned his reliability as a witness. Calmly clarified that criminal action is not covered under NDAs and that Deal had been carefully examined as a witness, and following a brief sidebar, the judge reversed the protest and told Deal to proceed. The courtroom was entirely quiet as reporters scrambled to type every word, including the court artists paused sketching to listen as the prosecution team exchanged anxious looks with Diddy's family members in the gallery. With newfound assurance, John went over their notes, adjusted his tie, and stared straight at the jury. "But what I'm going to tell you isn't predicated based on hearsay or rumors. I was present and witnessed it firsthand, was compensated to ensure that no one else spoke." And a whisper swept the courtroom. Diddy's lead lawyer got up to protest once more, but Diddy himself grabbed his lawyer's arm to stop him. It seemed as though he was eager to learn how much his erstwhile confidant was going to reveal, because he already knew what was going to happen. Disclose that the prosecutor came over holding multiple folders of evidence. "As evidence of your honor, Mr. Deal has supplied records that support heist testimony, such as job logs, security logs, and photos of the location." The judge reviewed the evidence logs at the sites in question, And Gene Deal took a long breath, nodded, and said, "Go ahead." Started to speak, and the words that came next would alter everything. "I've been holding a lot of John declaimed for a long time that he had safeguarded celebrities throughout the I've worked with the top stars in entertainment for more than 25 years. However, nothing comes close to what I saw when I worked under Shaw Combs." He turned. Gene Deal told the courtroom, "You made me complicit," pointing straight at Diddy. That it began with a simple job offer, as many employment partnerships do, and that it was secured by a security. The way they presented it, it was an agency that focused on protecting celebrities. They told I would be in charge of what was meant to be a prominent job with great salary. The re-imp salary was double what I had been earning as a security guard for one of the top names in music. After years in the military and private security, I believed I understood what I was getting into. But John felt something was off the first day he showed up at Diddy's estate. Staff went around the enormous property, which had secret rooms and distinct wings. The other security staff chatted, in low voices, anxiously avoiding eye contact. The leaving head of security grabbed him aside as soon as he inquired about standard security procedures. Ought should have been the first warning sign. They said it was for secrecy, to preserve the privacy of Mr. Combs, yet it seemed like they didn't want standard security measures that could produce documents showing he was gradually exposed to additional employment needs, which were out of the ordinary. There were stringent guidelines on which attendees might leave events and when it was safe to do so in order to protect celebrities. Someone was constantly being observed, not only for their safety, but also for control. John claimed that following 2 weeks of employment and a number of intimate gatherings, Diddy came up to him directly, stated something along the lines of, "You work for the brand, not just for me. You notice leaves on these walls." He grinned, but it wasn't a warm smile. Was ownership I was providing for my family, and I had just John, he added, the money was too good to walk away. He bought a new house from, but I also felt uneasy about what I was witnessing, so I began to keep my own insurance coverage and my own records. He described how he started recording occurrences, discussions, and happenings in a private journal that ultimately support his views using covertly captured images and videos on his phone, wasn't intending to use this information for any particular purpose. Rather, it was self-defense in case. The judge, I didn't want to be the only one held accountable when someone got wounded, questioned if signing non-disclosure agreements had been a requirement of the arrangement. "Your Honor, nearly every year, several NDAs are amended, each one more expansive and stringent than by 2015. I was practically giving up my right to talk about whatever I saw, even if it was illegal activity." Diddy's lawyer contended that the prosecutor retorted that these NDAs made the evidence inadmissible, cannot legitimately stop someone from testifying in court or reporting crimes after taking into. The judge decided to allow Deal's testimony and evidence based on both points, but only insofar as they were directly related. Explained that he had submitted his paperwork to the criminal charges Deal 3 months prior after observing the monitoring to federal investigators. The footage of Diddy hitting Cassie in the hotel corridor matched the footage completely. What I had repeatedly seen, it wasn't a singular incident. The prosecutor went about his work as usual, ready to provide a 2008 Diddy security log as the first piece of proof. He shifted uneasily in his chair and read the note his lawyer had given him. Nobody in the courtroom was ready for what they were going to do, and they grimaced. Discover that the first evidence the prosecutor showed on the courtroom screens was a March 15th security log signed by Gene Deal in 2008. The journal included notes such as a female guest trying to depart around 3:15 a.m. imprisoned in the East Wing as directed by the boss, and the subject calmed down about 4:20 a.m. and, following manager intervention, went back to the main area. John clarified that the security crew used the euphemisms detained and boss intervention. Initially, we were told not to write down exactly what transpired, but being physically held prevented. When someone left and the boss intervened, Mr. Combs would usually threaten, intimidate, or occasionally attack, until the defendant agreed with his demands, the prosecutor demonstrated. This journal, which was from 2010, revealed his penmanship in the identical pattern in the margins where he had written personal remarks for the third time this month. After the first year, I need to explain the protocol to the team. Understood that we weren't provide security in the conventional sense. Rather, we were enforcers, and our role wasn't to keep Mr. Combs from external dangers. The prosecutor requested a bargain in order to shield him from the consequences. To further clarify his meaning, we were told to seize phones at the entrance of any visitors to the exclusive event, who were specifically invited by Mr. Combs, would frequently have drugs added to their food or beverages without realizing it. We were instructed to use physical force, if necessary, to stop them from leaving early if they attempted to do so. We were dispatched to deal with the problem after being threatened to disclose what transpired. Deal explained how Diddy would host what were known as special events inside the company. These weren't merely parties held at his houses in Miami, Los Angeles, and New York. They were staged situations in which specific visitors, mostly young women attempting to enter the field, would be placed in settings for which they had not given their agreement after being sequestered while inebriated. The prosecutor displayed a number of images Deal had taken of different members of the security crew, obstructing exits, removing phones, and in one unsettling picture, carrying what seemed this woman was asleep as she passed through a Miami party's corridor. Deal discovered in 2012 that the woman had attempted to depart after realizing what sort of incident it was. With one of Mr. Combs's helpers, she was given a drink, and within half an hour she could hardly stand. So I told her to go to a private room so Mr. Combs could speak with her about future deals. As he explained the methodical nature of these incidents, his testimony became increasingly unsettling. There was a process for everything, including locating possible targets and separating them from there, the rooms to utilize, the buddies who would serve the doctored beverages, and the team members. He clarified specific activities. It was a well-oiled machine for, saying that some employees' members had designated responsibilities, and procurers would find and invite at events there. Young women had handlers who would be near them, were fixers who would follow up, and cleaners who would arrive later to eliminate any evidence. With anyone who could cause issues later, Deal stated in his testimony that he was a member of my team, was in charge of the security infrastructure that made all of this possible. We made a sealed record of who was allowed to enter, who was not, and who had access to their phones or other recording equipment. Setting where Mr. Holmes could act however he pleased without worrying about being discovered, the most damaging proof arrived in the form of a covert video that was captured on his phone in 2015, which depicted Diddy in a heated duty was heard arguing with a woman who was attempting to leave a party, saying, "You don't leave until I say you depart. Are you aware of what happens to those who disobey me? They vanish." During the court presentation, a woman with a blurry face was crying and stating that all she wanted to do was go home. Grabbed her arm violently in response, instructing someone off camera to seize her phone and ensure she understood. I recorded this because I knew someday someone, the situation Deal revealed, would have to understand that this wasn't a singular incident. For the 15 years I worked for him, he produced new proof of a pattern nearly every month, resulted from abuse, compulsion, and intimidation that lasted for almost 10 years. Numerous claims were supported by the security records, photos, and videos created by prior witnesses who documented actions that had been previously attested to but not confirmed midway during the presentation of the operation by an insider. Proof that Diddy was clearly upset because he had been sending angry notes to his lawyers, who appeared more worried, repeatedly shook their heads or muttered, "That's a lie." The prosecutor asked Deal, loud enough for the front rows to hear, about the choice to come forward now, after a 15-year quiet bargain. I stared straight at Diddy as I watched the hotel footage of him abusing Cassie. I had observed similar behavior dozens of times and instantly recognized it, but I couldn't remain silent any longer after seeing it on camera and knowing that the world could now see what I had been seeing for years. I kept telling myself that I was only carrying out my duties, but I later came to the realization that I was supporting abuse and that I couldn't continue to live with that no longer. As Deal went on to detail particular instances, dates, and sites that linked them to more witness statements, Diddy's poise started to break, his cheeks reddened, and he removed his tie while frantically whispering to the courtroom, his legal team. Observed as the guy who had presented himself as the victim of unfounded allegations during evidence presented during the trial came from Joan Deal, who had previously been compensated to keep his darkest secrets hidden, claimed that throughout the years, he followed Diddy into numerous private rooms in the hopes of talking about security issues. Instead, he was deeply shaken by what he saw. Young women who appeared confused and lost, some of whom I recognized from modeling or music videos campaigns. Some of them appeared scared and attempted to look at me for assistance, while others watched, and he halted occasionally while filming and directing everything as if it were the most commonplace thing in the world. I swallowed hard, since the point was that I didn't know how to quit the job. After a few days, his voice remained firm but empty. Once you're in deal. I received a call in 2011 after seeing a particularly upsetting occurrence. "The boss knows you've been asking," was the only thing uttered over the blocked call. "Remember your NDA and your family," he thought, as they hung up. Was merely a meaningless threat until a box showed up at his house. I nearly missed the USB stick that was unlabeled inside, but I did see that it contained video of, I don't recall actively taking part in the party, but I was there to assist in arresting a woman who was attempting to escape. Stood at the door that was preventing her from leaving. A voice behind the camera said, "Now we both have something to lose." According to Deal's testimony, the terror he experienced at the time was unlike anything he had ever encountered. I understood that I wasn't simply. He clarified that this was the point at which he started to methodically record all he saw. It wasn't only for my safety anymore. I was aware that there were victims who lacked a voice, strength, or means of defense. Therefore, I reasoned that if I gathered sufficient proof that the prosecutor would eventually be held accountable. Additional personal comments and security logs from 2012 to 2020 for each exposing details of Diddy's purported control over both his employees and the victims. There were Diddy's texts telling Deal how to handle emails and situations, talking about cleanup at different places, and showing pictures of what Deal explained as morning pictures displaying ruined chambers and women's abandoned. Diddy sent Did a text message in 2016 saying, "I need a full sweep of Miami. Every room, gadget, and recording should be found and destroyed." The exceptions. Deal described how the operation grew over time once it began, hosting gatherings at his mansions, but ultimately there were rental homes and hotel suites. Everywhere he traveled, including yachts, the same system would be used for phones, gathered exits, tracked down chemicals, and had a staff on hand to deal with any issues. The prosecutor inquired about particular instances in which other celebrities or business leaders have claimed to have taken part in or observed these incidents, and the contract mentioned a number of well-known people who had been displaced, some as participants and others as being uneasy. Deal stated that not all observers took part and that some would go as soon as they understood what was going on, but the majority remained silent since Mr. Combs would frequently remind people that they were afraid of being banned, or worse, create careers, and I also ruin them. He explained how Diddy would utilize a combination of unspoken threats, professional prospects, and kind gifts, maintain loyalty by offering bonuses for really challenging circumstances. On his yacht, you make yourself feel like a member of his inner circle before casually bringing up a former employee. Was no longer possible to locate employment in the field, and the message was constantly, clearly, remain faithful or endure the recordings and evidence as well. Disclosed discussions of particular incidents that supported the claims made in the criminal case. There were talks about bribing possible witnesses, erasing evidence, and fabricating tales to shield Diddy's reputation as the hearing went on. A number of jurors were clearly disturbed while taking copious notes. Diddy's irritation had turned into a cold. This part of the arrangement ended with a stern look at his former chief of security, his statement by outlining his own part in the system, of which I was a daily participant. Every time I stopped someone from leaving and every time I looked the other way, I remained at that position. I can't alter the issue, but I can speak the truth now and hope that it assists the victims in obtaining a justice agreement, at which point the threats against them became personal. My wife noticed that I started receiving odd calls in the middle of the night. The teachers of my children reported seeing strange cars parked outside our home. I knew what it was when men asked me about their schedules. He didn't have to state it out loud. He simply made it apparent that my continuous quiet was at the expense of my family's safety. Thus, for years, Deal claimed that he carried out his duties while surreptitiously recording every smile he made. Staff meetings dismissed his wife's worries and concentrated on safeguarding his family. But if I read in the news that Diddy Cassie, the man, is being accused, producer, all the others, I asked myself, why am I still silent if they're talking? He glanced around the courtroom and saw that, in addition to harming these women, he had corrupted everyone in his vicinity. Deal's statement that we were all involved in his acts was what ultimately led me to pause, looked at the jurors, and leaned in closer to the microphone, saying, "It wasn't, the work was the trap," he said. From that point on, anything he did seemed as though there were conditions linked to it. He clarified that the reimbursement, his silence, was guaranteed by the structure. My base pay was good, but the real money came from incentives linked to situation, management, and unique events. In addition to losing that money, I understood that leaving would result in my being banned from the industry, and there was always the implication that if I revealed my role, the evidence would surface. He claimed that this was not an isolated incident, but rather a pattern. Didn't need to threaten individuals directly since he had mechanisms that handled it for him, including accountants, attorneys, and NDAs. By structuring security teams with evidence that could be used against them, he was able to. The prosecutor questioned Deal about a web in which everyone was implicated and had something to lose. Particular instance in 2018 when he contemplated leaving, what transpired, that recalled an incident where a young woman was so heavy that it made you want to run. We had to summon a private physician in the middle of the night because she was so intoxicated that she stopped breathing. There were no hospitals. According to the official report, she was revived by the doctor and went home the following day with a gift bag containing $25,000 in cash, and another NDA that I told Mr. Combs I was no longer able to complete the agreement. Specified in answer, Diddy picked up my mortgage and invited me into his home office, details on my children's college funding, family pictures, and stated, "Are you certain that what you're leaving behind is what you're risking?" The prosecution played a tape, had agreed to a 2019 conversation with Diddy, wherein Diddy may be John, you know too much to ever leave this family, was overheard. There is no middle ground, and you either support me or oppose me. Trump said, "Want to be against me?" As reports of probes started to circulate, the operation became more cautious to the surface, but we continued and moved. To staff were utilizing more isolated properties with stricter security measures, divided, allowing fewer individuals to view the entire image, yet the behavior persisted, as he explained when he watched from within. When Cassie filed her lawsuit and accusations against Diddy started to make the rounds, we had all witnessed it happen, so everyone on the inside knew it was true, but we were all told to lie about everything. In order to undermine her and give the impression that she was merely seeking financial gain, the prosecution inquired, "What ultimately led you to give your evidence to federal detectives?" Deal's voice lowered to a deeper, softer tone, and I remained silent for 15 years, I told myself that by speaking up, I was defending my family, would endanger them. But then the hotel footage began to appear, he claimed. He instantly recognized the pattern when he first saw the CCTV film of Diddy abusing Cassie. Another member of the security team called me and said, "John, they're attempting to purchase the hotel footage they're requesting from the police. This could disappear," and I realized I couldn't keep quiet any longer. He said, describing how it seemed like I was unaware that there was hotel surveillance footage until I discovered that the floor had fallen out from under him, maybe repressed, and I was aware that the evidence I had gathered might be the only opportunity for, according to Justice Deal. He spent the entire night going over his records, the security logs. There was a comprehensive record of all the images, videos, and text exchanges. He claimed that I was the only one who had kept it intact after years of abuse. Guilt, not fear, was the breaking point for me because I knew that if I didn't speak up, my silence would allow more abuse to occur, hurting other people, and I couldn't deal with the fact that my kids would eventually learn about this case. I wanted to let them know that I ultimately made the correct decision, he informed the court. I spoke with the FBI directly and informed them that I had proof dating back 15 years. I'll answer any questions you have or anything you require. He glanced at the jury. I was more than just a witness. I was also an enabler. I saw, recorded, and remained quiet, then gave Diddy another glance, this time in a more acerbic tone, and you were aware that I watched every moment of the judge's last statement, permitted Gan Deal to stand from the witness chair and address Diddy directly, moved a few paces closer and met his gaze, saying, "You made an empire out of, you called it loyalty, you called it family, you called it the fear. He started terrible kidway, but all you created was a criminal enterprise that ruined people." Diddy sat silently. I didn't blink when I saw his lawyer speaking in his ear while he was immobile. I witnessed what you did to those ladies, and I heard what you did to anyone who disobeyed you. You wounded individuals for your own enjoyment, with the things you uttered when the doors were closed. Power. And then Deal took something out of his pocket, his first job. When my 2005 contract turned yellow and wrinkled, I sold my integrity that day. He held it up just before I saw what you were actually doing, and that's when I started to contribute to the issue. I've brought this to the court as a reminder of what occurs when decent people remain silent. Jury, if you believe this is only about parties, celebrities, or a certain way of life, you're missing the big picture. This is about strong guys setting up structures to take advantage of weaker people, and if we don't hold them responsible, it will continue to occur. He then had one final encounter with Diddy. You once said to me, "Loyalty is the only currency that matters. Hey, truth is more important." He gathered his notes, went back to the stand, and waited. Should be discarded, and did he sit there looking pallid and stiff? His fingers were unblinkingly gripping the table's edge because for the first time during his trial, he was up against someone who they couldn't be bought, intimidated, or silenced. Given everything you've done, the prosecution asked one last inquiry. Mr. Deal stated today, "Do you think Sean Combs continues to be a threat to, as long as he has money and power?" Others didn't hesitate to trade. His system is still in place, his supporters are still around, and the victims remain terrified. The only change is that there is now evidence. Diddy abruptly got up as Deal was dismissed from the witness stand. Tensed security guards in the courtroom approached, but before anybody could in response, Diddy yelled, "You betrayed me after everything I did for you. Sean, you compromised yourself when you believed that your money and fame elevates you above the law. Thus, the judge called for an order right away. Diddy was his own lawyers and court officials forcibly detained him, and he resisted their hold. As he continued to. The spectacle of the previously created music is accompanied by cries of betrayal and deception. Everyone in the courtroom, including the judge, was surprised when the mogul lost control, mandated a break, and Diddy's legal team led him out of the courtroom. The final picture before the doors closed showed Diddy's angry face twisted and dread as the guy who had been his most reliable guardian left outside the courthouse. A throng had finally released him from the secrets he had kept for 15 years, assembled after learning of the damning testimony when the agreement was revealed. Before questions were yelled, from all sides there was a brief period of quietness. He raised his hand for quiet. Beyond what I testified to today, I have nothing more to say. This isn't about me. He walked to a waiting automobile, flanked by those who cared about the victims and justice. A reporter, shielded by federal guards, yelled, "Are you fearful of reprisals?" Deal hesitated for a moment before boarding the vehicle. I've been terrified of cars for 15 years, but today is the first day I'm not. When John D. got off the witness stand, the door closed and he was gone. Didn't have the appearance of someone who had won anything, but rather someone who had, after years of moral compromise, he finally freed himself from the courtroom's restrictions. Diddy's outburst left everyone stunned and hardly able to comprehend what they had seen. Even the judge. Some jurors had been obviously shocked by the severity of the confrontation, impacted with multiple tears, and Diddy, after being taken out of the allegedly carried on his tirade in a separate meeting room outside the courthouse. Deal didn't talk to the media before being put to sleep by a doctor. Instead of gloating or posing, he left by walking out the front of the courthouse with his head held high but when questioned, his shoulders bore the burden of 15 years of suffering he had observed. When asked later by reporters if he was afraid for his safety, he allegedly said that you can't threaten someone who has nothing left to do, since the truth is my defense. Conceal. However, the world was just starting to respond. Outside the courtroom, to the executive protection agencies entered a silent panic in the security sector, halted contracts with specific security firms, and scheduled emergency meetings. Prominent customers and acquaintances who had previously openly backed Diddy were now making cliched remarks about shock and detachment during a tragedy that occurs behind closed doors. PR firms send internal memoranda to clients asking them to activate management teams that examine their NDAs and security procedures. And although many attempted to act as though we were surprised to see that the internet was already connecting dots, which is its strongest suit. That had been on display for years. Ancient photos of Deal reappeared. Insecurity logs are always present, and the background at Diddy's activities is constantly vigilant, were re-examined with fresh insight and, most bitterly, prior charges that had been leaked years previously. Fans weren't simply startled that extortion efforts were being re-examined with fresh legitimacy after being rejected. That someone like Deal had been a part of the system infuriated them, angry that legal threats had suppressed valid concerns for years, and angry that for a very long time, the entertainment business had permitted such behavior. The period of when it came to undeniable protection, Diddy's legal team requested a mistrial, asserting that Deal's testimony was biased and that his evidence ought to have been disregarded because of his NDA signed. The court decided that the testimony was admissible and rejected the motion, and pertinent to the criminal accusations, and non-disclosure agreements are unable to lawfully prohibit testimony regarding criminal activities. Legal professionals discussed the potential implications of Deal's evidence for the lawsuit. Marcia Johnson, a criminal defense lawyer, told CNN, "This testimony is terrible since it originates from within the organization. This isn't a purported victim who might be written off as possessing hidden agendas. This individual was compensated to safeguard the accused and instead provided evidence of years of suspected criminal activity." Thomas Reynolds, a former prosecutor, continued, "The prosecution has constructed a case that demonstrates not only isolated instances but the infrastructure that is provided by the testimony and proof of a systematic pattern of activity that spans decades, each of the separate accusations, together to form a logical criminal operation." When the trial continued in the courtroom, Diddy looked notably different from his more modest clothing took the place of luxury suits, and his former self-assurance was replaced with a tired. His family's courtroom presence has become less vigilant, with only his mother's frequent attendance allowed the prosecution to continue presenting evidence, which was now contextualized by, according to Deal's evidence. Other former workers came forward after being subpoenaed to verify some details of Deal's story. The defense approach changed from absolute refusal to imply that, despite some actions being improper, they did not amount to criminal activity. The lawyer contended that Deal had financial incentives to gather and preserve evidence, implying that he had always intended to use it as leverage or to make money. But the jury had already suffered harm, had received information from a witness who had recorded the alleged crimes as they occurred, and who had ultimately decided to speak in spite of the personal expense as the trial approached. By the end, the ramifications went much beyond Diddy's own celebrity's security procedures started to come under more scrutiny. The morality of non-disclosure agreements that addressed possible illegal activity was questioned. Outrage replaced disbelief at one man's acts in the public discourse, concerning a whole system that had shielded influential offenders. When the 6 weeks of testimony and 4 days of jury deliberation led to the final verdict, it was found to be guilty on all charges of racketeering, conspiracy, sex. The judge sentenced Diddy to 2 months in prison for trafficking and prostitution transportation. As he was led out of the courtroom, he was warned that the most serious charges may result in decades in prison. Diddy in handcuffs didn't resemble the music entrepreneur who had amassed $1 billion enterprise. He resembled the criminal the jury found him to be, who had victimized others and silenced witnesses outside the courthouse by abusing his authority. John stated briefly that today isn't a win for me. Rather, it's the start of I hope my testimony helps ensure that the victims find healing, but I regret every day that I didn't speak sooner. Strong men can no longer create abusive and silent regimes. The case would eventually lead to important changes in the entertainment sector. With security companies implementing new to restrict the extent of non-disclosure, lawmakers submitted laws pertaining to ethical standards and whistleblower protections. Partnerships with victims' rights organizations in cases of suspected criminal activity recorded rises in demands for assistance from those in the entertainment sector, but possibly the most significant impact was more straightforward. It demonstrated that even the most meticulously planned systems of silence may ultimately fail. If you thought this tale was instructive, please let us know. One person chose to be honest. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and like this video. We're dedicated to providing you with in-depth coverage of significant tales that others would overlook, and your assistance enables us to carry on with this work. Thank you for viewing.